450 infantry fighting vehicles reduced to 129, a fourth squadron of F-35s gone, and 9 Hunter-class frigates down to just 6. In recent years, alongside the exciting announcements like AUKUS and the Long Range Fires program, we've also become used to quiet announcements of defence programs being reduced, delayed, or cancelled. It's important to keep track of these changes because they end up having a massive impact on our future defence capabilities. Let's count down 7 of the biggest defence cuts in recent years. Today, we're talking tactics. As I've mentioned in many previous videos, Australia is moving into more dangerous geopolitical times. Tensions in our region have meant that the government has needed to get serious about defence spending. And on the one hand, we have had quite a few big acquisitions announced, like nuclear submarines, general purpose frigates, and a number of autonomous vehicle platforms. But with defence spending only slowly increasing in real terms over the next decade, how is the budget being balanced? Well, by cutting projects that are now deemed to be lower priority. So what has been cut over the last few years, and was it the right call? What impact will these cuts have on the ADF, the Infantry Fighting Vehicle? Under the Australian Army's Land 400 Phase 3 project, 450 infantry fighting vehicles were originally planned to be acquired. These IFVs would replace Australia's upgraded M113AS4 armoured personnel carriers on a one-for-one basis. 450 IFVs would have given the Army an unprecedented amount of firepower on the battlefield. However, following a recommendation in the 2023 Defence Strategic Review, a decision was made to cut down the order to 129 vehicles for an estimated budget saving of around $20 billion. This scaled down vehicle fleet means that we will now only be able to equip one mechanised infantry battalion instead of a full mechanised infantry brigade, significantly reducing the firepower and protected mobility of the Australian Army. Following the decision to cut the number of IFVs procured, the Army chose to acquire the AS-21 Redback from Hanwha. We've covered this platform before, and the good news is that it's looking likely that it'll be a real asset to the Army once delivery is completed in 2028. But at the same time, the ADF being able to deploy a full mechanised brigade would have been a significant deterrent to potential adversaries in our region, and I can't help but feel that this decision dooms the Australian Army to be a bit lightweight on the modern battlefield if we do become involved in a peer-to-peer conflict. Lightly armoured vehicles like the Bushmaster and the Hawkeye can still move troops around the battlefield and provide a limited degree of protection and fire support, but neither have anywhere near the firepower or armour of the Redback. It's also a bit of a double blow, as not only will the Australian Army suffer from the cut, but our local defence industry will too, as the Redbacks are being built in Australia, and a higher number of orders would have created more jobs for longer. At the end of the day, this is a huge capability killer. The Redbacks are vital partners for our Abrams tank fleet. These vehicles carry a full infantry section of 8 men, and once dismounted, these troops provide vital protection for our tanks by handling more easily concealed threats, such as army infantry with anti-tank weapons. The Redback is unlike anything else we have because not only can it keep up with the Abrams tank when advancing through rough and hostile terrain, but once it reaches the enemy and dismounts its infantry in front of the objective, it can stay in the fight and help out with its superior firepower, including a 30mm autocannon and its second-to-none armour protection. The Huntsman Self-Propelled Howitzer. Another victim of the Defence Strategic Review was a 2nd Regiment of AS-9 Huntsman Self-Propelled Howitzer to be procured under Land 8116 Phase 2. The estimated savings of around $1 billion from this cut is to be redirected to fund the acquisition of the M142 HIMARS. This means that Australia will only acquire 30 Huntsmans and 15 AS-10 armoured ammunition resupply vehicles instead of double that number. Although it looks like a tank, it's better to think of the Huntsman as an artillery gun on tracks. The Huntsman is armoured enough to provide a level of protection to its crew, but not enough to allow it to get into firefights with actual main battle tanks. This is a less painful cut than the previous IFVs, but still, having an army equipped with 2 regiments of self-propelled artillery doesn't sound like a huge ask. And again, this also impacts the Australian defence manufacturing industry, as these were also to be built in Australia by Hanwha Defence. At least in this case, the savings from reducing the number of Huntsmans is earmarked to help the Australian Army procure long-range fire capabilities, which it very much needs. If you'd like to know more, check out our dedicated video on the Huntsman. F-35 Lightning II. The Lockheed Martin F-35 Lightning II, also known as the Joint Strike Fighter, is the cornerstone of the Royal Australian Air Force combat fleet. We currently have 72 of these aircraft spread across 3 squadrons. It's a 5th generation stealth strike fighter and probably the most advanced combat aircraft in the world. As a multi-role aircraft, it is capable of conducting both air superiority and strike missions, but it also has advanced electronic warfare and reconnaissance capabilities. These 72 F-35s replaced the Australian fleet of FA-18 Hornets, which were Australia's previous main fighter force. Following the release of the Defence Strategic Review, the Albanese government decided to cancel these plans in favour of maintaining the Super Hornets for longer and diverting the savings of around about $3 billion into new warships and long-range missiles. Prior to the recent Australian election, then opposition leader Peter Dutton announced that if elected, his government would deliver these additional 28 F-35s by 2030. However, with his election loss and the Albanese government showing no interest in expanding the fleet themselves, it looks like Australia will be stuck with only 72 F-35s. Given that the plan was for the additional F-35s to replace the Super Hornets rather than expand the number of combat aircraft the Air Force operate, I don't think this cut would have a significant impact on our Air Force's capabilities, particularly since the Super Hornets still have some advantages over the F-35s, such as already having integrated AGM-158C long-range anti-ship missiles, while the F-35 is still in the process of integrating it. This missile is one of the Air Force's key new anti-shipping strike capabilities, capable of hitting ships from 370 kilometers away. Another capability the Super Hornets have that the F-35s lack is the ability to fire the RIM-174 or Standard Missile 6. This missile has been tested on American Super Hornets and can engage air-to-air targets at ranges exceeding 463 kilometers. This capability would be especially useful in countering the Chinese PL-15 missile, which is said to reach ranges up to 300 kilometers. The missiles are already in use with our Hobart-class destroyers as a long-range ground-to-air missile and anti-ballistic missile. On the other hand, if we were going to acquire a final squadron of F-35s and retain the Super Hornets at the same time, that would have been a better outcome. The Royal Australian Air Force has had a soft limit of around 100 combat planes for decades, but it's probably time we started moving away from that arbitrary number. Once again, if you are interested, we do have a dedicated video on this, particularly around Peter Dutton's election promise to buy the additional 28 F-35s. MQ-9B SkyGuardian. The General Atomics MQ-9B SkyGuardian, based on the Reaper, is an unmanned combat aerial vehicle capable of providing persistent airborne intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, and electronic warfare, as well as a precision strike capability. The Reaper became famous from its use by US forces in the Middle East in these roles. In April 2021, the US State Department approved the sale of 12 SkyGuardians to Australia. However, this acquisition was cancelled less than a year later in March 2022. The cancellation freed up $1.3 billion in funding, which was redirected to the Australian Signals Directorate. Unlike most of the cuts we're talking about here today, I think this one was actually pretty sensible. If Australia had received the SkyGuardians a decade earlier, we could have used them to support our forces in Afghanistan. However, Australia is now building an ADF capable of defending Australia and its northern approaches, and so it doesn't really have any need for this type of drone now. SkyGuardians, Reapers, Predators, and other drones like it are most useful in counter-insurgency or low-level conflicts where the enemy doesn't have access to combat aircraft or anything more than short-range anti-air capabilities. However, in a peer-to-peer conflict, these slow-moving drones would be extremely vulnerable to attack. The long range and endurance of aerial drones are great for long-range intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance missions, but Australia acquired the MQ-4C Triton for those types of missions. So I think the cut was justifiable and we didn't lose any capabilities that we actually need here in Australia. Joint support ships. Project C 2200, announced in 2020, was intended to build 2 multi-purpose auxiliary ships capable of both sea lift and replenishment operations. These ships would eventually replace landing ship dock HMAS Choules and significantly expand the Navy's support capabilities. However, these ships were cancelled in 2024's Integrated Investment Program in order to help fund the General Purpose Frigate Program. The Army's forthcoming heavy landing craft could help to move Army assets in Australia's littoral. However, this decision will leave the Navy with only the 2 supply class replenishment ships to support an expanded fleet of 26 warships at sea with fuel, water, ammunition, and stores. This is even worse than it sounds given the teething issues the supply class ships have had in recent times, with both ships being sidelined for extended periods since commissioning due to mechanical defects. Hopefully these issues are ironed out in the longer term, but it's ridiculous that for much of 2024 and 2025, the Navy had no operational replenishment oilers. Acquiring more replenishment capable ships of a different design would be a great way to hedge against the risk of ongoing supply class unreliability. It's great that we're eventually going to end up with a bigger, more powerful Navy and an amphibious army, but we also need to have the less sexy stuff like logistics squared away so we can deploy these forces where they need to go and keep them there as long as the mission requires. Hunter-class frigates. Following years of delays and cost increases, in 2024 the Surface Fleet Review recommended that the number of Hunter-class frigates be reduced from 9 to 6 and 11 general-purpose frigates be acquired to replace our current Anzac-class frigates. With the Hunter-class reaching ridiculous levels of per-unit cost and frequent construction delays, it's probably not a bad thing that we're cutting down the number of these things that we're building. At almost $4 billion each, before weapons and other key systems are fitted, these ships are going to be some of the most expensive frigates ever built in the world, and we are several times the per unit cost of similar warships overseas. Even with construction of the first ship of the class having started in 2024, HMAS Hunter isn't planned to be commissioned until 2032. The Hunter class should be very versatile and capable ships when they are finally delivered, but until then, hopefully the General Purpose Frigate Program will deliver an effective capability faster and for a fraction of the price of the Hunters. Military Satellite Communications System. In April 2023, a military satellite communications system project called JP9102 was awarded to Lockheed Martin. This $7 billion project would have involved launching several military satellites to create a secure and sovereign communications network for our air, sea and ground forces across the Indo-Pacific. The cancellation of this project in November 2024 leaves the ADF more susceptible to cyber attack and electronic warfare, and means that we need to come up with another plan to ensure our forces can securely communicate across the region. It's also a big disappointment, as it would have been the ADF's largest and most ambitious space program so far. But what do you think? It's common for government to reduce the number of units in a defence cut rather than completely axing the program. One of the issues with reducing the number of units delivered in a project is that it almost always results in unit costs increasing. Sometimes this means that defence only receives a small saving despite the number of platforms delivered being halved or more. With this in mind, the last thing we want is to burden our reasonably small defence force with large number of different platforms that we only have a few of. That's a surefire way to run a costly and inefficient military. Looking into the future, I think the only way of truly securing Australia's defence priorities is to increase defence spending so we aren't constantly playing this juggling game of announcing one important project but cutting another at the same time. But what do you think about all of these cuts? Did you think that they were necessary? Or do you think that the Australian government should have just stumped up more defence spending to keep the acquisitions going? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments section down below. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button. And if you're new here, why not subscribe so you don't miss the next video? I'd really appreciate the support. That's it for today. My name's Pikos, and we've been talking tactics.